In 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And welcome everyone to this episode of the Real Leaders Podcast. And welcome everyone to the Real Leaders Podcast. Before we begin this interview with Lisa Bodell, just want to go over a few things just to make sure you guys are all in the loop. The first thing, if this is the first time you're watching this podcast, and if you enjoy this podcast, go on the Apple or Spotify, any platform, and hit the subscribe button. Leave a review. Let people know what you think about this show, so when they come to it, they know what to expect. Second thing, you can watch this on LinkedIn Live. You can share this, and make sure you follow our account on LinkedIn Live so you can get all of these interviews. I think we got 3 more this week. We're going to be having a good time on the Real Leaders Podcast and bringing on special guests like Miss Bodell here. Now, last thing, the Real Leaders Impact Awards are coming up. The 8/31 deadline is the early bird fee. It's $175 to apply. Now, it is for innovative, impact companies with a social purpose, an environmental purpose, any company that really is just transforming lives. That's impact to me. If you think you're that company, go online to real-leaders.com/impact-awards-applications, or just go to the homepage. You can find it all on there. It should be pretty clear. All right, well, with that being said, we will get started here in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Real Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Edwards. Joining us today from the future, people, is the CEO and founder of Future Think and Real Leaders Top 50 Keynote Speaker, Miss Lisa Bodell. Lisa, thanks for being with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me. That's the most energetic introduction I've had all week. You're the best.
We're going to try. We're going to try to keep the energy going, Lisa. Now, this is interesting. I've had a lot of guests. I wouldn't say a lot of guests. I've had about 10 guests on the show that call themselves futurists. Now, I thought, being complacent and all, I thought this was some self-proclaimed title. I was like, oh, they're futurists. They like the future. They know more than I do. They can predict things I can't. Let's have them on. But I was watching your speech, Lisa, and you said you have a degree in this? You can go to school to get a degree in futurism? What is this?
It is not. There are some people who are, we call them armchair futurists. They think that because they read about trends that they're futurists, but there is you can get a degree. It's typically a master's in science. You can also take certificate programs. And several of the people that I belong to with associations, the Association of Professional Futurists, which is one of the largest, we teach at the University of Houston in Clear Lake. And the idea is you can get a master's in foresight. And people in academia don't call it futuring, but it's a foresight degree. And the idea is to teach you about how to determine the implications of trends and how to activate the findings of trends. Because that's really what it is. Like, what's the implication? How do I take advantage of it? And there's a studied way to do it. I mean, futuring is really just how do you teach people about change and how it happens.
So what got you into futurism, and how does one think?
Like a futurist? Well, so a happy accident. I actually was, I was going home to visit my grandfather in Midland, Michigan. And I happened to meet a futurist there who was the futurist of Dow Chemical. And we were networked together because I really like to network with people that think differently. And I met him and I said, his name was Andy Hines. He's a friend of mine. And I said, what's a futurist? Like, that's a thing? I didn't know you could be that, right? And he told me, and he was the resident futurist at Dow Chemical. He went on to teach at University of Houston Clear Lake, by the way. And he said, I teach people about possible, probable, and preferable scenarios of change. Because think about that. You're trying to learn what's possible, but it's not just about that. It's what's preferable, right? And sometimes it might be possible, but not preferable. So you have to remember, like, not all change is positive. And of the change that is positive, how do you want it to impact you? And so that's what I really learned about that from Andy. And then I decided to study it. I became part of these groups and I learned all the tools around futuring. So I then could teach futuring and change to others, and it changed my life.
So now you have the understanding of being a futurist. You know how they think. Do you have this sense of purpose to go explore and tell others in these organizations about this? And what's some of the impact that you yourself have been able to have in these organizations?
Totally. I mean, I think people that are futurists are, by nature, they're very different thinkers. They connect dots in different ways. They don't think linearly. They think in terms of constellations. A future horizon for me, when someone says, tell me about the future, I don't think in terms of quarters or 1 to 3 years. I think in terms of 5, 10, 20 plus. You know, if you're an oil and energy company, you're not thinking about just the next quarter. You're thinking about 50 years from now, right? In terms of oil supplies. I mean, they're big picture concepts, and that's typically what a futurist is. The reason I like futuring on a more, everyday level is because it's about helping people reach their potential. So the future isn't about who you are. The future is about who you're becoming. And futurists are always thinking about, what are you going to be becoming? So you can start planning for that now. I mean, most people go through life or work every quarter, and that's very just activity driven versus foresight driven. So all in all, if we teach people how to better anticipate trends, we can help them anticipate who they're becoming, and that's reaching your potential.
I think that's so interesting. So
cool.
Let's talk about Shell. I know you worked with Shell. What was your approach with them? How are they thinking about the future?
Well, Shell's a partner, and we've worked with them on smaller levels, but Shell also has a lot to teach everybody about futuring. They're one of the grandfathers of futuring, because they are one of the few groups that has a foresight group called Game Changers and other areas, and they are really great at scenario planning. So one of the cool things about Shell and companies like them is they bring people like us in to help them plan the scenarios. Most companies where they fall down is they just plan, right? Strategic planning is they come up with a strategic plan. Well, that's a problem, because what if that plan isn't right? Shell and a lot of energy companies, because they have such big investments and long-term horizons, they do scenario planning. So they have strategic plans, A, B, C, D, and E. And what's cool about that is they're not placing bets just in one area. They're looking for hunting grounds of different places they can place bets, depending on how things change and how things morph for the future. So really, people that do scenario planning are really good at mitigating their risk and doing lots of scenarios of who they could become. So let's take Shell. In the future, energy companies might not be about extracting energy. They're going to be about growing it. And so they need to have very different, not just equipment and businesses, but people. So they don't need geoscientists anymore, people that know how to mine. They need bioscientists, people that work with living organisms. So they really need to think about, who do they hire? And that's really different, because you know who they're going to hire and steal from? It's not going to be people in engineering. It might be people from pharmaceutical companies. It might be bioengineers. So you've got all these new competitions that are going to happen that 10 years ago you never would have said. That's what futurists do, is they talk about the implications of change that you probably never have thought of before.
Interesting. Now, Lisa, let's stay on this example. We interview a lot of impact companies. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. People who are trying to sustain the future, transform these lives, intentionally taking on these problems and building a business around it. How much do you factor in environmental external costs into your trends, into your forecasting? This environmental, do you see this as a trend, or do you see this as something that businesses are going to increasingly have to adapt their innovation around?
You mean like literally the environment, like climate change, not just culture, yes. Environment. Yeah. Well, I think all of them do. I mean, one of the things we talk about in terms of futurists, when you scan for signals of change, that's what we do, right? It's signals of change. You think of an acronym called STEEP. And you want to bucket all your information across or within one of these STEEP buckets: social, technological, environmental, economic, and political. Those are usually the 5 STEEP areas of change. And when something is really a big impact, it can cross all of STEEP. It could be like a mega impact. So some things aren't just in one bucket, right? They can cross many of them.
Okay. I like that acronym. It's very nice. I'm sure people can take away from that. Now,
yeah.
You also mentioned a few times about how you were starting out. You went to these organizations and you found maybe some of the people that were asking you to come on were some of the people that were blocking innovation in their company. Maybe tell our audience a story about kind of your journey through helping companies.
Well, we do a lot of things. So, my company, Future Think, we teach futuring, but we really teach change and innovation. And that's the goal, a lot of what we do. There's specific groups within companies like at Shell and Citigroup and Accenture. They have futuring groups, right? Those are small groups of people who think big. But most people, they want to cross the organization to learn about change and innovation. That's what me and my trainers do. That's like futuring 101 stuff. How do you change? And what we were finding, it's very interesting, is that most people have the desire to change. Like, they have the skill, but what they don't have is the permission. And so what we needed to do was actually create a culture that would allow people to have the behaviors of innovation. So you are very innovative, but you might not be allowed to do it, or you might not have been taught how to do it with your team. So it's our job to come in and not just give people the skill sets, right? The tools, the ideas, I can teach you a million of those, but the mindset of how to change, how to take a risk, how to be agile, how to be resilient. That is really what people were looking for more, so they could have the permission to do it.
Interesting. Now, what
Yeah.
are some examples that stick out to you? Some companies that you've worked with that maybe had this idea of innovation and had maybe bounced a few ideas off of you, and then you come back and you say, let's reframe this idea.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting because everyone knows this, right? You go into a brainstorm, everyone comes up with ideas, you leave the room and nothing happens. But that's what happens to most people. It's not that they can't come up with the ideas, they can't take action on them. And so I was kind of surprised by this. We would come in and do all these amazing, practical, actionable brainstorms like assumption reversal. How do you challenge how you work and do the opposite of it to unlock change? We would come up with creative collaboration ways from within, adjacent, and beyond to stretch disruptive thinking. And even though we would come up with these ideas, what we realized was it wasn't about the ideas, it was about the barriers. Until we broke those barriers to innovation down, people couldn't get to the innovation itself. So what became our number one tool was called Kill a Stupid Rule. So it was not about having people come up with ideas, it was knocking down the things that were holding them back from doing it in the first place. And so what we would do is go into companies and say, let's start with Kill a Stupid Rule. Let's get everyone into a room and figure out within their sphere of control, what are all the things that hold them back from better innovating, being more creative, coming up with new ideas, doing more valuable work. And you'd be surprised, all the leaders would say to us, oh, I don't know if people are going to come up with much. I will tell you that they come up with dozens and dozens of things. And what's interesting is what they come up with aren't rules. They're policies, procedures, time sucks, annoyances, cultural norms or assumptions that have been around forever, rules of engagement, those kinds of things, politics. But what's cool about Kill a Stupid Rule is you can quickly get rid of stuff that everyone's like, oh, I just assumed that was a rule. And we can get rid of it and save time for work that matters. And it creates a behavior that tells people, you know what, if you see something that's not working, it's okay to say no. Because we're taught to just say yes, right? So what we do is we teach people no first to create the space so innovation can happen. Kill a Stupid Rule is a godsend for people.
So I've only worked in one large corporation, but I do remember that, we did have a lot of policies, and I would assume that would be because of the size and risk. Maybe, a lot of people breaking rules and regulations, things like that. It's a lot of risk on the company. It could be a liability. Now, how do you view this? How do you view conformity and risk taking in a large corporation?
Well, so we say that there's a lot of problems, right, within companies. It's first of all, it's complexity, and then that creates complacency. That's kind of, they go hand in hand. And it's endemic at large corporations just because of scale. Right? There's more layers, there's more people, there's more decision making, there's more politics, but it happens at all companies, small companies. And the reason why is because complexity or barriers to innovation are driven by behaviors. They're not just driven by tactics or policies, it's behaviors like fear and risk and power, control, and trust. And those are things that are human behaviors. And it doesn't matter if you're a company of 2 or a company of 2,000. So as long as you can identify those things, that the behaviors that you want to be okay to do, or what holds you back from doing the things you want to do, that's what really helps you start to simplify and be able to have time for more innovative things. So for example, at Pfizer, they'll say, we one of the things that holds us back is decision making. What do you mean by that? There's so many layers of decision making. Why? I don't know. It's always been like that. Let's list all the things that you need in terms of making decisions. Are there certain decisions that can have less, it takes 1 to say yes and 2 to say no, or there's certain decisions now that we look at it can be done without their bosses. And suddenly they start to just kind of peel back the onion and realize, well, we never really questioned these things before. We just gave them the tool to do it. So we are taught to follow rules, not challenge them. And the companies that are more simplified and more innovative make it okay and give the permission to challenge and simplify those things.
Now, this behavior change, With your experience, where do you think it needs to come from? Does it come from the top? When you say we, does it come from the top, or is it the leaders, the decision makers who are driving the values and instilling that throughout the organization? Is it the people in the middle, the day-to-day workers, or the people at the bottom? Where in your experience do you see this change coming from?
Yeah, so it has to be anyone that tells you it's only from the bottom up, I think is lying. And the reason I say that is because it's very hard politically within an organization. If you don't have the sign off from the people who are paying the bills or setting the strategy, it's really hard to change behavior. So it has to strategically come from the top, but the action and empowerment needs to come from the bottom. So the reason that we always teach change based on first the sphere of control, what you can do every day, it makes people feel empowered, but also responsible. And then we start to engage with their sphere of influence. So that's why when we go in, for example, when we do Kill a Stupid Rule, I would say to you, Kevin, I'd say, you know what can you look at your work? What are your time sucks? What can you stop doing? Because what that does is that stops you from saying, well, I hate what HR does and legal does and procurement does. That's what people want to do. They want to complain up of big things that are too large and too complex to change. But when you start in your sphere of control, you start to see that change can be real, it can be quick, and you can have influence over it. So it starts in the center down below, and then it can move up.
And I'll answer that question for you. Emails. I'm on my email too often, Lisa. Is that a
I'm
problem
sure you
you
are.
see? Is that a problem?
I'm sure you are. Yes. It's funny because I say to people, I'll be on stage and I'll be doing a keynote and I'll say, what do you spend your day doing? Just shout it out to me. And I'll be in say I'm in a ballroom, or used to be in a ballroom with 3,000 people. And no matter the country, the culture, where, the layer of people, the industry I'm with, the first two things out of everyone's mouth, what do they spend their day doing? Are meetings and emails. And what's surprising about that is I have everyone raise their hand and I say, when you were being interviewed for this job, how many of you were questioned on what great emails you send or what a great meeting you run? And no one gets that. They're not hired to do those things, but that's where they spend all their time. And so then I start to talk about, well, what do you wish you were doing? And we teach them exercises to shift from meetings and emails to meaningful work.
What does meaningful work mean to you?
Meaningful work is, it's interesting. I can define it because to me, it's not just what gives me, satisfaction, but it adds value to my business goals and gets me closer to that every day. So if you ask people what meaningful work is, most people can't answer it. And because they're drowning in mundane tasks, meetings and emails every day. So can I share a technique that's really cool to try?
Go for it, yeah.
Okay, so I would tell the leaders on this podcast, no matter small company, big company, right? But think within your team that you operate with every day. Okay, this is something you can do individually or you can do with your team. I think do it individually first if you're a leader, and then do it with your team. So make a T-chart on a piece of paper. On the left-hand side, write down what do you spend your time doing? And track it for a week. And you can be as anal as you want. You can get one of those time tracking apps or, look at your calendar, whatever, okay? But write down 20 things. And these are typical things you spend your week doing. And please be specific. Like, don't just say meetings. Say like your weekly status meeting, your quarterly update, I don't know, you know what I mean. At the end of that week, you look at your list, okay? And here's what you're going to find. You're going to look at it, and I'm going to first challenge you to say, you know what? Circle the things on that list that you think are valuable. You define what that means, okay? Valuable to you personally, to your goals, to getting promoted, I don't know. And what you find is that people only circle a handful of things. And so you have to ask yourself, if something isn't circled, why are you doing it? If it's not valuable, the first thing that people say is, I'm obligated, my boss wants me to. That's where a great team discussion can happen. Because if you're spending your time on things that aren't circled, what the hell's going on? But the idea is that's where those are your time sucks, right? You can get rid of stuff on the left-hand side because you want to make space now for the right-hand side of the T-chart. That side should be labeled, what do you wish you were doing? And people typically then write down, give them 5-10 minutes as a group, things like brainstorming, coming up with more innovative ideas, doing more thinking, meeting with more customers. What you really are doing there is you're defining meaningful work. And the aha moment is when you as a leader, as a team look at it, and on the left-hand side of the chart, the first side we did, those things tend to be internal and obligatory. The right-hand side of the chart, what you wish you were doing, tends to be big picture thinking and external. So that is the meaningful work. And you got to shift from the left side to the right side. And you literally can do that exercise in no time at all with your team or with yourself.
So that's incredible. Now, do you think that this is the power of simplicity? Is it just this simple that we're T-charts all day long? Identify where you are. We're going to reflect a little bit more. We're going to think outside the box, and we're going to make sure we understand why we're doing what we're doing.
So, do I think it's that simple? Yes, I do think there are lots of things we can do to get rid of unnecessary work. The problem is our behavior. A lot of it's fear. You don't want to make someone mad. I mean, it's out of goodness in a lot of cultures and companies because they have a culture of nice. And so they don't want to say no, or they don't want to not go to that meeting, or they don't want to offend somebody, or they don't want to give that direct feedback. And so that's why things take longer or whatever. And I think if we can start to change that culture with some simple things like killing rules or auditing meetings and getting rid of them, allowing people to say no. I can give you lots of tips and tricks like that. Yes, our work could be simplified. I could get you back 2 to 3 hours a week right now, easily.
Lisa, how do you see the future of work looking like? Like, I'm just thinking about this. Now, this would change a lot of organizations, a lot of work cultures, if they were to do these exercises and actually have these meaningful discussions and then make those changes for their people. How do you see the future of work looking like in 10 to 20 years?
Well, that's going to be interesting because you always have these wild cards like Corona, don't you? Whereas before this, people said, oh, these were common conversations. You can't train people remotely. You're never going to be able to do keynotes or do discussions remotely. Well, guess what? You can, right? Until people are forced to change behaviors, they resist it. They can't imagine, that's what futurists do, imagine a different scenario. What do I imagine work being like? I do, there's a few things. First of all, I think it's not going to be all or nothing. We're not going to go back to how we were. I think it's going to be a hybrid for a few reasons. One, people are realizing that commute time now can be used for other things. Now that work and life have blended into one, there really is no boundary between the two. And people like the flexibility. So the work-life balance, if we can figure out some of this, exception being a lot of people with young kids, we have to figure out the school issue. I think that people are liking it more. Companies are going to call it work-life benefits by allowing them to work from home, but really what it is for companies is a cost savings. They're going to have huge real estate savings. They're going to have huge travel savings, and they're going to realize that not everything has to be a meeting in person. So I do think in the future, for example, we will meet in person because what you miss from being remote, while it's very productive and very independent, you miss the human connection. You miss the informal conversations. Like when you socialize things, you hear what people really think. It's the non-planned Zoom call where you get to really talk about things. That has all gone away. And that's a big problem right now when people collaborate. We're getting too tactical.
Sure.
So I think when people get together now, it's going to be a lot more meaningful. It's going to be a lot more select. And I think it's going to have a lot more powerful connections for people when they do.
How is your organization making changes? How are you being adaptable? How are you being flexible? What are some things that FutureThink is doing to
Oh my God.
relevant?
How much time do you have?
All the time in the world.
Okay. Well, we have to eat our own dog food. If anything, we have to be creative problem solvers, we have to be agile, and we have to be resilient. So we did have some strategic luck, as a training and futuring organization that in February, just before here in the States, when COVID was going down, we launched all our on-demand learning. And we've been planning that for 18 months. So that was just some very strategic good luck. The other thing we did is we pivoted all our workshops to be 1 hour because people have ADD. We are only accelerated learning now. And we made them all online. And what you learn online, a virtual presentation like this is very different than in a classroom. We translated every single one of our courses in a month to do that. The other thing we did is we realized that accelerated is where it's at. So we do nothing now more than 1 hour. We actually launched a whole series of products that are 15-minute work hack webinars because we realized that 30 minutes is the new 60-minute meeting and 15 minutes is the new sweet spot for people's attention. So if you want to get people working remotely and being engaged, you have to change how you teach and think and work. You have to engage people in different ways, right? You got to do polling, you got to do breakouts, you got to do techniques. but you also have to do it in a very short amount of time and give them one thing. So no more teaching things and you give people 20 things to do. Teach it for a little bit of time, show them how to apply it, and then let them go do it. That's it. Because I think that's how people are going to have to absorb. It's kind of like the 3-minute YouTube video is much more productive than the all-day seminar.
Lisa, it seems like you got a lot of fans here, a lot of fans chiming in as well.
Cool.
Obviously, they're attending the workshops for you. When you see that, like, why do you think people follow you? Why do you think people listen to you? Why do you think when you come onto a stage, people clap for you?
I think a few things. One, it's really hitting a pulse of how people feel, right? Not just how they're working, but how they feel, right? Simplicity is an easy one because people are overwhelmed. I mean, it's, people aren't lazy. It's not that they're not getting things done because they don't get it done. It's just because they have too much to do. And they're looking for ways to solve it. They want to do the things they were hired to do, but they can't get to it. Why? And so I think that the message around simplicity really hits home, which is different than the message of productivity, isn't it? Productivity is you're not being productive enough. Simplicity is I want to help you focus on what matters. Those are very, very different. And the second thing I really think that they like is not just the content, but the approach in terms of, I think you have to be very self-deprecating and have some humor. I mean, I feel that I write books on things that I'm trying to figure out myself. And I was trying to figure out why somebody I'm extremely productive, I'm really organized, why are things not simplified? And it's because I realized that being organized is not being simplified. And I really had to set on a journey to figure out, so what does simplification mean? And that's how I got to not being able to do more, but to be able to do valuable. And I think that those messages really resonate with people to feel better about themselves. And I give them very practical things to get them started on it. Theory is one thing. We can sit here and talk about simplicity all day. I mean, I've heard 50,000 people talk about it, but unless they help me do it, it doesn't matter. Like, I want to do it. And I think that's what I'm good at doing.
That's a really good point, about the organization as well. Sometimes I'll find myself just trying to get organized just to get organized, and not keeping it as simple. And now when you're in the future, like, how important is it to be in the moment, to keep things simple, to not get overwhelmed, and make sure you're making note of what is actually right in front of you?
How do you actually focus? Is that it?
Yeah.
Well, there's a few things. I mean, there's lots of different techniques. I mean, one of the things I do in the morning is I do think it's helpful to be organized, right? You can't be all over the place and be simple. But the idea is what's most important and what's valuable. So I have 2 things every day that I have to get done. And then, lots of other crap pops up. I mean, we all have that, right? I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'm flooded with emails and meetings, and I run a simplicity company. There are things outside of my sphere of control that I can't help, but I always have my focus on the 2 things that I want to get done, because that's what matters. By listing those 2 things, it helps me constantly check myself on what's valuable and what's important.
Lisa, I'm so happy that you are in this top 50 keynote speakers. I was listening to one of your speeches last night, and I kind of have it in the background. I'm just taking notes and anything, and then I just paused and I just had to go back to my screen and look it up. And for anyone listening to this, I'd highly recommend you watch one of your speeches. Now, when you watch this back, I listen to my podcasts all the time and I make fun of myself and I can't stand them. Now, when you watch yourself,
I do that too. That's funny. I don't like to listen to myself.
Exactly. What goes through your head?
A bunch of things. One, of course, I always want to change my voice like you. And I actually do watch my speeches because I think that's how people that present learn, right? In terms of your mannerisms and how you slow down and how you talk. But what do I learn? It's not so much watching my speeches, but I always ask people for the B-roll to watch the audience because I have to listen to the response. People learn in terms of writing their books and writing their speeches based on feedback. That's one of the things that is really great. For example, in this Real Leaders thing, when you see people's comments, as well as when you're in an audience to get people's nonverbals. Because frankly, it's not what you say, it's how you make them feel that matters. And to be able to understand the feelings behind the words or behind how they're reacting, that's what I always look for.
Do you think leaders need to do more of that? Understand how they're making people feel? What are your thoughts on what a good leader is?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. On what a good leader is. It is about feeling, but I don't mean that in terms of a touchy-feely way, but everyone has kind of an agenda, a behavior, and everyone's human. That's why I say most of complexity is driven by behavior, right? Risk and fear and power and trust. And no matter what organization we're in, it's the same thing. I don't care if you're regulated or not, it doesn't matter. So I think a good leader that can understand that's important. But I do think this is an extreme time that we're living in with COVID, but change is constant. And so a really great leader to me is someone that can be a creative problem solver, be agile, and be resilient. For a lot of younger generations, I think that's hard because agility and resilience, like stick-to-itiveness, has not been something that we teach in school, right? We teach to go to different things. I think being agile but resilient, sticking to whatever your idea is going to be key. For a leader, being a creative problem solver is really key, especially as things are more volatile. And I'll give you one last thing that'll help people here. So if you want to be a really good creative problem solver, you have to kind of look at the positive the positive out of the negative. And there's a technique we teach called That's Fantastic. Have you heard of this before?
I have not.
Oh my God, you're going to love it. So I invite everybody here to, in your next status meeting, or try this, right, with a team member. We teach the technique, but then you do it in the real world when something bad happens. So you get people together, and let's pretend that I'm the CEO, okay? And you are my employee, and you just have to come to me and just bring me bad news. And the only way I'm allowed to respond is with the phrase, "That's fantastic," and tell you why. So for example, what if we owned a bowling alley and you came to me and you just had to give me bad news, and you're like, "Lisa, bad news. We're no longer allowed to use bowling balls. It's illegal." And I would say, "You know what? That's fantastic. Bowling balls have been around for 50 years. I've wanted to reinvent this game. We got to get into video games anyway. That's the best news I've heard. That's fantastic." So do you see how it just changes it from problem to potential?
That's right.
If you can get people in terms of "that's fantastic," they'll start to look at bad things in a much better light.
Mind games. Now, is there a link for that we can post or find?
That's fantastic. You know what? I've got some articles on things like that I will get to you, but you can find it. I have a Forbes articles that I write every week. You can find my column, and you can go to futurethink.com, and there's a lot of free tools there too.
Wonderful. Well, Lisa, I know you kind of just described what a good leader is, and this question is going to be a little redundant. But the last question we always ask people on the show is this: what is your definition of a real leader?
Well, I always say a creative problem solver. That's what I think a real leader is. It's somebody, because that embodies a lot of things, right? When they're faced with adversity, they're creative at solving it. They help people show potential, not just problems. And they stick to it because they're creative. They're going to figure it out. And that gives people a lot of confidence when they operate with fear. And those are the leaders that more people trust.
Lisa, it's been a pleasure having you on the show today. Thanks for coming back in time. I know you got to get back in the car and the Back to the Future and send it off the dock. But for people listening to this, for Lisa Bodell, I'm Kevin Owers, asking you to go out there, be a creative problem solver, and always, folks, keep it real. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks so much.
Okay, good people. Thanks for hanging on. Now, we've got 36 people on this call. Now, Lisa has agreed to stay on because she's so nice and she is a creative problem solver and she wants to solve your problems. We have asked people to ask questions on this show. So while I'm pulling up this first question, please ask yours and ask away. We've got a few minutes here left. And the first question, Lisa, comes from Julie. She says, with visionary thinking, where do you see the best opportunities exist, and who do you think actually activates these efforts?
With visionary thinking, well, I mean, that's a great question, first of all. And I think the people that are visionary, they don't limit themselves by thinking too short-sightedly, and they allow themselves to think even very bizarre. So you can tell me all day long, I think Elon Musk can be crazy, for example. But the guy thinks big, and I mean, everyone here just saw what happened with SpaceX and NASA this week. I mean, it was pretty freaking cool, right? I mean, you have to have people that think crazy and have dreams and visions like that allow themselves to think big, to really be, the people that think about foresight tomorrow. I think there's a lot of really great resources that someone like Julie and others can embrace to start thinking like that, right? It's not just That's Fantastic, but there's going on sites like Trend Hunter, Springwise, and some other places that show you how people solve different challenges around the world. because that's what you want to do as a future thinker, is you want to connect dots from different places to say, maybe you're in an oil company and you're going to start to realize that it's, I don't know, someone who makes toothpaste that can solve your next problem. You got to start getting out of your vertical and thinking way beyond the horizontal. So I think I would start checking out some of those trend sites and start to see how you can connect new dots. The future is not linear, it's a constellation. That's how you have to start thinking.
Love it. Now, Lisa, the next one comes from Noah. And Noah asks, what is the biggest thing that holds people back from thinking like a futurist?
Fear. I really do. I think it's fear, because the first thing we do is we always question our assumptions around things. And one of the things that futurists do is they reverse assumptions. So the reason people think short-sightedly is fear of my job, fear of taking a risk, fear of not making my numbers, right? That's why they get in this quarterly habit. And if you really want to think about the future, you're thinking 5, 10 years out. You're thinking about solutions that probably haven't come up with yet, right? There's no construct to think about it because it doesn't exist. One of the techniques that we think we help people do to help them overcome this barrier is called assumption reversal. And what you want to do is next time you have a problem, break it down into parts and think about all the assumptions you have around that problem and completely reverse it. So let me give you an example. Let's say one of your problems, I'll use something stupid here that everyone can relate to, is your weekly status meetings are complete time sucks, right? They're like, it's stupid, we know it's not productive, whatever. Well, let's break that down to parts. What's the assumption about your meeting? It has to be weekly. We have to meet. It has to be an hour long. It has to be in a conference room. You get the idea. Mm-hmm. Now reverse every one of those assumptions. What if it wasn't in a conference room? What if it wasn't a secret location? What if it changed every week? What if it wasn't 60 minutes, but it was 10-minute sprints every single day? What if, and this is a real thing we did with HBO, by the way, what if it wasn't just the same set of people, but you could invite whoever you wanted? And what they decided when they reversed all these assumptions is they made their meetings to be 30 minutes once a month. You can invite whoever you wanted, including competitors. Hmm. And they wouldn't release the location until the night before with the agenda, because they knew if people didn't show up, right, that meant they hadn't read the agenda in advance. So it was pretty cool how they reversed assumptions and fixed their meetings. So think differently. Don't be afraid. Challenge your assumptions.
Interesting. Some unconventional wisdom there again from Ms. Bodell.
Very unconventional.
Last question, Lisa, comes from one of your fans. She asks, absolutely loved both Why Simple Wins and Kill the Company. When is your next book coming out?
Oh my God, your lips to God's ears. I've started it already, and I'm hoping at some point it'll be next year. And hint, hint, it is still going to be around the simplicity topic, because that really seems to have struck a nerve with people, and I'm taking it to the next level.
Wonderful. We just had one last question fly in. I want to ask this because they took their time to write this, it looks like.
Sure.
Lisa says, good morning. I am a K-12 digital literacy specialist for a school district who helps train and support educators how to instruct, engage, assess, and create positive relationships with their new students coming this year. This includes kindergarten students. You mentioned feedback. In the world of COVID, what advice would you give to educators and parents/guardians who are in this new way of communicating, learning, and getting feedback from one another? This comes from Amy.
Wow. Well, first of all, Amy, thank you for everything you do. What you do is so important right now. And, my advice to parents is I hope through this experience they appreciate teachers more and instructional design, because it's not easy, right? You can't just take what's in a classroom and put it online. A few things. I mean, I think there's a few people that play in this effort, right, Amy, which is, first of all, it's hard for us to have teachers all of a sudden become instructional designers. And I think that they need help, right? So it's kind of unfair to put these expectations on my daughter's 8th grade math teacher to suddenly become really good at teaching online. So it would be great to have people like you be able to give these teachers simple tips and tricks to keep kids more engaged, right? Rather than the teach and preach method, how do we get them more engaged through, for example, my district here in Westchester uses Zoom School. more the polling, more the breakouts, more the interactivity, and more experiential learning, which is where learning should be going anyway. Hint, hint. So this is great. I think for parents, it should be being able to give them a way to participate better. And, I have to think about that, Amy. I think being able for them to participate better is, are there sessions where actually the parents can actually be a part of it? I don't know if that's great for working parents. Are there ways that you can do more of the homework online that takes that burden off of parents? I'd like to, I'd be interested, Amy, and I'll give you my email here. It's Bodell@FutureThink. You can contact me on our website to hear how you're doing it. And I can maybe give you some other suggestions that I've seen from other school districts. But I definitely think it's going more interactive and experiential, almost more game played than it has in the past. I also think, by the way, shorter bursts of learning, especially for the younger kids, is going to be much more productive than longer, because I think it's too long for them to sit in front of a screen.
Interesting. We'll appreciate the answer there, Lisa. Gosh, what is education going to do? That's crazy. That's another whole topic we could go on for another day.
Well, God bless people like Amy, because I think education, it's time for a reckoning. And I think this actually could be a really cool thing to push us more towards skills that kids need, right? Creative problem solving, experiential, as well as getting kids digitally savvy and more in tune with the work field. Like, I think things have to be more accelerated in micro bursts. And they have to be more real world based rather than so theoretical. So I'm hoping that Amy has some good suggestions too.
I'm sure she will. We'll appreciate your time here again, Lisa, answering our guests' questions at the end of the show. For everyone listening to this episode will be uploaded next week on Real Leaders Podcast. Just go to Apple Podcasts, type it in, rate and review the show, let others know what to expect. Again, for Lisa Bodell, I'm Kevin Edwards, asking you to go out there, be a creative problem solver, and always, folks, keep it real. Lisa, thank you so much.
Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it.